Welcome to the Best Little Town Podcast, your go-to source for everything happening in the town of Bedford's local government. Whether it's new initiatives or important decisions shaping our town's future, you'll hear it right here. This podcast is dedicated to keeping our residents informed and engaged.
Hello, this is Bart Warner, Town Manager of Bedford. It is Wednesday, May 4th, and I want to welcome you to this episode of the Best Little Town Podcast. Communications effort on behalf of the town of Bedford in cooperation with our partners at Media Squatch to provide greater information and keep people informed about the operations of your town government, particularly the actions of town council, which meets on the first and third Tuesday of every month. Coming to you this morning because we had a meeting last night on March 3rd. Before we get into it, I want to remind folks that you can watch that on live stream through Facebook, through YouTube. Thank you, Woody. YouTube.com. If you go to search for Town of Bedford, Virginia, you can find us there. So if you can make it in person, we'd love to have folks in the room with us. If you can't, though, you can watch the live stream. Those then are kept and archived on youtube.com as well. Also, the minutes of each meeting, once they're approved, are posted to our website at www.bedfordva.gov. You can click on government and look for the meeting information there and keep a list of, well, pretty much every meeting that we have available there. So getting into the actions taken last night, first I will mention that prior to the regular council meeting, there was a meeting of the Streets Committee. That is a group comprised of Mayor C.G. Stanley, Vice Mayor Darrell Updike, and Councilman Jay Ippolito. We do have some standing committees dedicated to certain operations that sometimes we need to refer some specific matters to them that are kind of down in the weeds, but somewhere in between the administrative ability of staff to address, but not really ready for full discussion by council or full action. And last night was one of those situations. Streets Committee was convened to discuss two matters. One was banners. If you drive through town, and I mentioned this a little bit later in the podcast, you notice we have decorative street poles, particularly in the downtown area. Frequently, we have displays on those, sometimes seasonal banners, oftentimes recognizing local figures, recognizing our veterans who gave their lives, particularly related to D-Day and the Vietnam War. Those will be coming up. Christmas, all kinds of things. It's something that we enjoy doing. It adds life and color to the community. One thing that I'll let you know is as those things increase, we're having to decide how and when to put those things up, and that is all done by our Public Works Department. Except for the electric Christmas decorations, those are put up by our electric department. And we've had so many people wanting to put things on the poles that are colorful and vibrant that we need to develop some kind of policy to manage all that. So we had some discussions at the staff level about how to do that. And when we mentioned that to members of council, there was not really consensus on that. So we referred that matter to the Streets Committee. And they did talk quite a bit about the number of banners that we have, the different kinds of things, where they can go and when they can go. Vice Mayor Updike is the chair of that committee. He noted that, two of our significant contributors to that are the folks at the Bedford Boys Tribute Center. That's Ken and Linda Parker, who do a wonderful job. And also the Vietnam Veterans Memorial, Colonel Doug Berry is a primary official there who's interested in this issue. And Darrell noted that the two of them were meeting on their own to talk about what they would like to see in terms of the Bedford Boys and the Vietnam War veterans banners. And so no action was really recommended by the Streets Committee. We are looking to see if Mr. Parker and Colonel Berry will report back. And at some point, we will publish a policy that says how and when we put up these displays, which will provide greater certainty and guidance for staff. The other thing we talked about was Longwood Avenue. That was the subject of a recent speed limit change. Those of you who are familiar with that area know that that is a prominent residential street. It also carries with it Route 221 towards Forest. And it's a pretty wide area. Year or so ago, actually, I guess it was back in 2024, maybe prior to that, some citizens along there expressed concerns about speeding, and in response to that, council reduced the speed limit to 25 miles an hour, which is consistent with most of our residential areas. However, in that particular area, anybody who's familiar knows that it's rather wide, and we talk about the planning and psychological implications of design. I will tell you personally, I know the speed limit's 25, and I respect my neighbors in that stretch, but if I'm not paying attention to my speed, it's really easy to exceed that. And so we talked about one possible approach to reduce the width, at least visually, through striping to encourage people or give visual cues to slow down. And then we talked about the need for more police enforcement. Of course, I did interject that that's going to be a bit of a challenge given the limitation of our resources. Then the committee actually talked about the possibility of revisiting the decision to make that stretch 25 miles per hour. I will say that no consensus was reached. Another thing we talked about, and this has been in plans and was in the comprehensive plan previously, was making some improvements to either install a planted median in the middle of the street to narrow the lanes, or to come out from either side of the street with grass strips and or bike lanes. One thing we talked about last night was to see if there would be funding for that at a later time. So as is often the case, these deep dive discussions at these committee levels don't take place very often. And oftentimes they identify complicated things that aren't resolved immediately. And that was the case last night. So that committee meeting kicked off at 6 o'clock and it was concluded by 6:45. At 7 p.m., we went upstairs for the regular council meeting, which did begin promptly on time with the approval of the minutes from the previous meeting, which would have been February 17th. The next item is the report of the town manager, which last night I touched on a few things. First is to let people know that March is Youth Art Month. In cooperation with Bedford County Public Schools, the Town Public Works Department has installed banners on the downtown light poles displaying artwork by local students throughout the district. As you have a chance to come to downtown Bedford or pass through and you see that, recognize that those are all the product of our local school kids, and very talented folks they are, and the teachers and staff at Bedford County Schools. And of course, those are installed by the folks we work with at Public Works. The next item, as I mentioned at the last meeting on February 17th, the town received a $3.5 million bill for power purchased through AMP. A significant portion of that bill was attributable to the effects of the winter weather we experienced for an extended period of time. In effect, the town paid $1.2 million more in purchased power costs than what was billed to customers during the month of February. We received an offer from AMP to finance $1.2 million of that cost at an interest rate of 4.6%. However, to avoid additional costs related to interests, retain interest earnings on the cash within the fund, and preserve debt capacity for long-term strategic needs, we have proceeded with payment of the full bill using electric fund cash reserves. What this means, and we've had this discussion previously, is there are certain situations where there are expenses that the town pays on behalf of its customers up front to provide the power, and we do make a decision to essentially eat those costs instead of passing them along. Those of you who will look at our financial statements that we posted on the website again will see a significant decrease in the cash position of the electric fund over time. And if you look at those reports and also corresponding minutes of council meetings during those times, you will see those episodes when council did try to provide some relief based on its cash reserves that were available. We were doing that currently based on the pretty significant and frankly horrible bills that we all experienced as part of the extended winter weather last month. The last item I reported on last night was that we are working to schedule a public meeting to both share and gain information about the electric utility to be facilitated by a representative from AMP. We are tentatively looking at April 14th, that's a Tuesday, as a possible date, but we will provide confirmation as soon as we can. Our intent with that is to bring in a third party to answer questions and explain the factual information behind the bills, the way the electric department operates, the way we purchase power, and the way we sell it. We understand folks are still having questions about their bills. In an effort to simplify that, I'll repeat once again that there are basically two parts of your bill. One relates to the cost that we incur to get the electricity to your property before you ever use it. We've called that recovery. We've learned since that that doesn't really qualify as a meaningful term for folks, but for those of you listening, understand that that is the portion of the bill that we have to pay up front, and it's our cost to deliver it to your property. The other part of the bill is usage, and that's based exclusively on your own behavior and what you do within your house. Going back to the first part of that bill, the recovery part, this relates largely to economic situations that are across the country and exist across the country. It's not specific to Bedford. If you have friends in other places, I know back in my native area of Southwest Virginia, I've had a few friends and family members tell me they're facing the same situation. It's not really applicable to which company provides your power either. It's really going back to some of the energy policies that have been enacted, which have reduced the amount of plants that generate power. And in the meantime, we have greater demand for power based not only on increased usage for things like data centers, which get a lot of attention, but also just from the increase in population. Unfortunately, as I mentioned at the last meeting, given that reality and the factors of economics, it's highly unlikely that those costs are going to go down anytime soon until the issues related to generation are addressed or communicated in some meaningful fashion. And knowing that has some political ramifications to it, I don't really want to venture into that territory, but that first part of the bill that is the cost of simply generating the power and delivering it, again, is not likely to go down based on simple supply and demand. And just want everybody to clearly understand that, even though the effect of it doesn't make any of us happy. Going back to the usage part, that's the part of the bill where there is a meter that gauges the usage that takes place. We did have a rate increase back in September. That was discussed publicly at a meeting, and the rationale behind that was included. I was reminded, looking at an article by Justin Faulkner in the News Advance a couple of weeks ago, that our electric director, John Wagner, in explaining the need for this, also predicted that there likely would be some bills of approximately $2 million during our winter peak months. And we've certainly experienced that recently, but in fact, with an extended cold weather period where people might be using more power, that does make that an even more difficult situation for customers based on that. What we're finding is people have questions about this still. A lot of the high bills last month relate to usage. We do track the kilowatt usage for each property. So, the bills are going up already based on a rate increase and based on the cost to deliver it. But if there's something odd about the usage, if there's something out of sorts, if you used a significant amount of power more during one period compared to the previous period, we do have ways to address that. But the first is we try to work with property owners to answer questions. There are some simple things like adjusting your thermostat, reducing the temperature within your house during these cold weather events. There are sometimes issues with appliances such as water heaters. We heard one case where somebody had an issue with their well pump. There was a wire that was malfunctioning and the well pump was running continuously. Sometimes there are situations with HVAC equipment itself, and we recommend that folks check things out. In extreme cases, we've heard back from folks that reported a problem and they discovered that their neighbors were actually running an extension cord to their property. That's unfortunate for several reasons, one of which is that ultimately that becomes a civil matter between property owners, and then we have to advise people to seek legal help. But understand that the staff at Town Hall that collects your payments has ways to look into some things and provide some explanations and assistance. But ultimately, in the winter time particularly, we do see increased bills. We kind of expect that, but in situations like last month where we had below freezing temperatures for multiple days, it becomes even more of an issue. And that's a little bit of background. Again, we want to bring in a gentleman from AMP on April 14th to kind of answer those questions. We understand people are frustrated and we hear that. But the purpose is, and it's also a chance for us as the town to ask questions of AMP so people understand our relationship as well. So we'll provide more information about that meeting as we get that, and hopefully provide confirmation and a time for that as soon as possible. The next item of new business was appearances before council. The first person to speak was Mr. Bill Mosley. Bill identified himself as the manager of the proprietors group here in town. They provide housing units throughout the town, and they do their best to keep those housing units affordable. He had noted that he had sent an email to all members of council, including myself and Mr. Jim Messier, and asked if everybody had received the email. Everyone present acknowledged that they had. Mr. Mosley spoke about his reaction to some comments made at the Board of Supervisors meeting from the previous Tuesday by Mr. Bob Davis regarding affordable housing. Mr. Mosley shared the fact that he found those comments to be offensive and was concerned about the fact that they affect the town and reflect upon the town. And Mr. Davis is the elected representative of a district that includes half of the town. Again, Mr. Mosley went on to share his personal views, which, we're certainly entitled to do, and we certainly appreciate him taking that opportunity. And he did state that he was hopeful that council would come together to denounce the comments made by Mr. Davis, and that he was asking council to stand up and respond as quickly as possible. Again, the full context of Mr. Mosley's comments can be viewed online, and would encourage you to do that if you're interested. The next speaker was Ms. Ann DeLong. She mentioned that she is someone who had requested the information session about electric information, and appreciate the fact that we are moving forward on April 14th, but shared her personal concern that it has taken approximately 4 to 5 months based on her observation to get that scheduled. She also noted that bills have not been received yet in the mail, and the self-service portal on our website is not working. At that point, Ann Cantrell was given a chance to respond directly to that issue, and I'll pass this along as well. We did encounter an issue with our mailing service. That's the physical bill that arrives through U.S. Postal Service, where that was delayed. To the extent that that was within our control, we've addressed that, but it's also been an issue with the vendor, and we're speaking to them as well. And as part of our budget discussion, which we're going to have with council ramping up here pretty quickly, we'll talk about options for better ways to get that information out to people when they need it. Another thing I'll let you know is again, the bills are bad enough, but making a horrible situation much worse is the fact that we're late in getting them out to some of you in a billing cycle. And in addition, we're having some issues with our software, which coincidentally we're in the process of upgrading because we've known it's been an issue. One thing we mentioned last night, I want to reiterate with this podcast, is that based on the fact that some of the bills are horrible to begin with anyway, and this mailing issue, we will not be assessing any late fees in conjunction with last month's bill, particularly due to this issue with the online system and the mailing problem. So we mentioned that last night at the council meeting, but just wanted to reiterate it's not something we're happy about either. But frankly, given the impacts of the weather, and we're sensitive to the fact that it really hurts a lot of our businesses and customers and citizens, we're doing our best to try to work through this situation and accommodate folks to minimize the burden as much as possible. Moving on, the next item on the council agenda was council comments. Begin with Councilman Dave Foster. Mr. Foster responded to Mr. Mosley's comments and his request for a response. He shared his finding that affordable housing, the definition of it, is really pegged to certain metrics. And within the Lynchburg area, which we're typically aligned with for statistics, the median household income is $47,000. Of course, Mr. Foster went on to kind of talk more about the meaning of a median. Again, I'll encourage you to review the video for that. But he noted his observation that based on that number, half of the people within town would qualify for what is identified as affordable housing. Mr. Foster said that in his opinion, the comments made by Mr. Davis were wrong. Then he also responded to the criticism about the scheduling of the public meeting, to note that we have had several meetings regarding electric rates and operations to explain what we've been doing, but unfortunately we did not have a lot of personal participation in those, and noted that last month really represented almost a perfect storm in terms of the impacts of rate increases, service delivery increases, and usage costs. Next to speak was Councilman Dwight Evans. He welcomed everyone who was attended and also expressed his appreciation to people who are watching online. Mr. Evans thanked Bill Mosley for his comment and just asked that he consider the context of the comments and the source of those comments. Dwight also mentioned that the Liberty High School girls were, at the time, in Big Stone Gap in the state quarterfinal basketball tournament. As an aside, I will note, unfortunately, the Lady Minutemen came up short against Union High School, but they had another fantastic season that resulted in a trip to the state playoffs. Getting back to Mr. Evans' comments, he stated that he was sad about the closing of the hospice house by Centra, but he is hopeful that another provider of that service will be able to step forward and keep it running. Vice Mayor Darrell Updike was next to speak. He again thanked everyone for being there. Shared his observation that council works much better when they have impact from citizens, and that can be either in person or by any means. The opportunities to engage with council are not confined to meetings. Darrell noted that he is stopped frequently when he's out and about in the community. He shared his view that council is here for the citizens and want to know your concerns. He also asked for folks to give us ideas and suggestions in addition to your complaints and concerns. Next to speak was Councilman Stacey Haley, who again thanked everyone for being present. He shared his view that council really has little control over what other bodies say or do. He noted that there is a significant presence of affordable housing within the community. And then he went on to share his views about the Art Month banners and banners in general. Again, I'm skipping over because I'm having trouble reading my own handwriting. I would ask you to check the video and, of course, the minutes of the meeting when they're published, in case I've overlooked something in terms of Mr. Haley's comments. Next to speak was Councilman Todd Foreman, who also thanked people for being present. He referenced his many years of service as a police officer here and shared his view that there are 5 subsidized housing developments within town. He had frequent interactions with residents and citizens there. He did not like the comments made about affordable housing in general and the generalization of the people there. Shared his view that the citizens of those areas are good people, and we also need to hear from them. Todd then went on to mention the Fair Representation Voting Act, which is subject to an upcoming referendum on April 21st, I believe, relating to redistricting proposal for congressional districts. Todd shared his personal opinion on that, which again, I'll refer you to the video for that matter, but also encouraged everyone to review the proposal and make their own decisions. Todd also wanted to make sure people are aware of that because early voting starts as soon as March 6th. Councilman Jay Ippolito spoke next and responded to Mr. Mosley's comments and shared his view that we all agree that the comments were wrong and uncalled for. He stated that he appreciated the concerns that people have raised about the light bills. He also noted his attendance at an event from the Bedford Pregnancy Center on East Main Street. They have a bingo event every year, which is their biggest fundraiser. That happened recently, and Councilman Ippolito attended that and encouraged other people to both be aware of it and to participate in it next time it comes around if possible. Finally, Mayor Stanley completed the council comments by thanking everyone who was physically present. He thanked Bill Mosley and Ann DeLong for their comments. CG shared his view based on his own prior professional career that the electric bills were not unusual based on the weather experience and all the other factors involved. They're still unfortunate, but there is a logic to them that we probably need to do a better job of explaining. He noted that we're working with our representatives from AMP to explain more details behind the rising costs. He complimented Electric Director John Wagner for doing a good job in communicating with council and noted that John also serves on the board of directors, the oversight group for the AMP organization. He stated that he appreciated Bill Mosley's comments and noted that he does not follow much on social media, but he had heard the comments made by the member of the board of supervisors and that, in his opinion, he did not agree with the comments and also asked people to consider the source of those comments. He also stated that his view that council does not approve of comments but cannot control what other people say as private citizens or members of other political groups. Next item of business was report of council committee meetings, and Vice Mayor Updike reported on the meeting of the Streets Committee that took place prior, which I covered a little bit at the beginning of this podcast. Darrell noted that we appreciate citizen input on the question, and the banner policy that will be forthcoming will provide mainly details about when and where banners for certain activities will be posted. He also noted that there was a discussion of traffic calming efforts on Longwood Avenue, but again, no recommendations are forthcoming and certainly no action was taken because those actions have to be taken by a full council in a public meeting. Moving on to the consent agenda, we had appointment of members to the local board of Building Code of Appeals. We have two people, James Rose and Jody Mayhew, who are currently serving. Their terms expire on April 30th. On a motion made by Stacy Haley, seconded by Todd Foreman, council voted unanimously to reappoint James Rose and Jody Mayhew to the local board of Building Code Appeals for 2-year terms to expire on April 30th, 2028. The next item of new business related to award of a contract for professional services for the proposed rail stop. As most people are aware, Bedford has been working on the possibility of attracting a passenger rail stop in connection with Amtrak service to the community for several years. Kind of began as a grassroots effort with some citizens, not only in town, but also in the county and also into Franklin County, quite a few residents of the Smith Mountain Lake area. Examining that process, and ultimately the approach that's been taken is to see if the approach makes sense. Ultimately, and I'll come back to this in a minute with other comments, the likelihood of Bedford receiving a stop on the Amtrak line depends on Amtrak. It's going to have to make sense from a business perspective based on Amtrak's observations. And again, I got a question later I'll come back to. Even if we built a station, it still has to meet the business model for Amtrak, which is a federal agency. So we're making progress on this. Basically, the data that this grassroots group was able to obtain. We shared that with the folks in the state and the federal governments as well as Amtrak, and it's got their attention to the point that Congressman Morgan Griffith's office was able to secure a Federal Rail Administration grant for planning, environmental evaluation, and engineering of a proposed station, and then also with a plan for construction of that in a sequential manner. We are at the point where we're ready to do that environmental analysis, engineering, and design work, and we've gone through a selective process to award that contract. The firm that we're currently focused on is called AECom. They've got a contract they've submitted to the town. We've got that reviewed by our town attorney's office. There's a little bit of back and forth still about some precise language within that, which I'll mention in just a minute. But in order to move forward, we do have to engage in a contract to do this work. And last night we asked council to grant approval for the town manager to enter into that contract. Every now and again, I'd like to draw attention to the fact that council met back in October and established certain priority areas. And I reminded folks that this particular activity relates directly to town council's priority related to downtown revitalization and economic redevelopment. So there was a little bit of discussion. Our town attorney, Mike Lockaby, explained the ongoing discussions about the negotiations with the legal team at AECom. Said there's one particular section, 18.1 of the contract, that is being discussed and trying to be resolved. They're very close on the language, but they didn't have it pinned down last night quite yet. Unfortunately, there is a deadline for the reporting related to this grant activity, which is March of 2027. So in the interest of advancing the issue and resolving the questions, Mike suggested that there would be a motion to approve the scope, price, and language in general and substance of the contract, with the understanding that there's still further work needed on Section 18.1, and that needs to be resolved to the satisfaction of the town manager and the town attorney. Speaking as the town manager, I will tell you I'm going to defer to the town attorney. That motion was made by Mayor Stanley and seconded by Councilman Foreman. Vice Mayor Updike shared his view that he was glad that we were still moving forward and asked if this means that we are making progress. I provided what I was trying to frame as the most accurate answer. Didn't mean to come across as flippant in the remark that essentially this is clearing one more hurdle or obstacle in the process, but it's not the same thing as making progress. And that's why I provided the little bit of information on this podcast that I did. That, again, we're going through this process. That if this is successful, we find that it makes sense to design and build something. We then have to build something, and the local match for that is $5 million. So there's plenty of things that have to happen before this can even be considered to move forward. But to Vice Mayor Updike's question, we continue to clear hurdles. Councilman Stacey Haley noted, and Mr. Haley has been involved with the grassroots group as well, that Bedford County and Franklin County have also been part of our discussions about the station. And he asked if they were involved in this particular level. I responded, and I'm glad to provide that clarification, that particularly our neighbors in Bedford County have been enormously supportive and helpful. A lot of the citizen demand is coming from Franklin County, and we've reached out to our professional counterparts there about helping us out when we get to that point. Otherwise, we'll just continue to follow the process. And DeLong asked a question from the audience about the cost related to the project. Mary Zirkle, I began to answer the question, but I deferred to Mary because Mary's kind of been our point person on this project. Noted that the local match at this point is $375,000. That has been allocated by council, and that information is available in the minutes from previous meetings and also our videos. So again, we do our best to try to make folks aware of things, but we understand that sometimes that for various reasons people might not be aware. Ultimately, the motion to proceed with the contract with the exception of getting Section 18.1 satisfactorily resolved, passed by unanimous vote of all members of council present. Next item of new business was a budget amendment related to sale of surplus assets to the Public Works Maintenance Supplies line item. I'm going to summarize this by saying that our department heads are frequently trying to find ways to maximize income and reduce expenditures, and in this case, our Public Works Director, Tom Woodard, was able to sell some surplus equipment through GovDeals online auction platform, resulting in net proceeds of $7,760. The revenue from that is intended to be moved into the maintenance supplies budget for the general properties account, and that account covers a variety of activities within town, mainly related to the maintenance of our town properties. On the motion by Councilman Dwight Evans, seconded by Vice Mayor Updike, Town Council unanimously approved acceptance of the revenue of $7,760 and allocation of that to maintenance supplies for the Public Works Department. Also, we'll note that in terms of the established priorities of council, this pertains directly to public services and staff. Next item of new business was another budget amendment, this time related to the OtterBus grant, Phase 4. Those of you hopefully or who are listening are hopefully aware that we do have a bus service here in town. It's the OtterBus. It runs on routes that cover the entire area of town, and that is funded through a grant from the Virginia Department of Rail and Public Transportation, thus the Phase 4 reference. And the Bedford Community Health Foundation, DRPT provides 80%, Bedford Community Health Foundation provides 20% of that match. And we're in the fourth phase of that funding. This kind of corresponds to the state budget. Basically, in order to keep this project going, Town Council was requested to accept revenue totaling $193,964 and including an exact match on the expenditure side of that amount for funding of this. And again, that cost is actually kind of passed through the town while we are the fiscal agent for the grant. Bedford County Health Foundation actually pays that local match, and we have a documented agreement with them. Councilman Stacey Haley made a motion to approve that transfer. That was seconded by Councilman Foreman. Councilman Foreman went on to extend his thanks to the Health Foundation for funding the match and noted that the service itself is a great asset to the town. Councilman Haley also added his favorable comments about the service and the fact that it's currently free and it's available to provide access to residents along the route to pretty much any point of town that you would need to access. Vice Mayor Updike shared his view of the popularity of the service and the fact that he's heard from several citizens who talk about its value. Councilman Dave Foster asked about the future of the service, and Mary Zirkle, again, who's our point person for all things grant related and often things transportation related as they relate to economic development, explained the Phase 4 grant funding. We're at a point where the Commonwealth of Virginia has provided the majority of the funding for this. When that began several years ago, there was always an intent to then transfer the funding to a federal source, and we are moving forward in that direction. Mary indicated that federal funding is available. We're in the process of pursuing that. The structure of that is a little different. The federal funding involves a 30% local match instead of 20%, but the Health Foundation is aware of that, and they're on board to take that over once we shift from a state funding grant to a federal funding grant. Mayor Stanley also shared his positive view of the service itself and the positive comments that he's overheard within the community. On a unanimous vote by all members present, the budget amendment was approved that allows the funding and the local grant match to continue for the Bedford OtterBus service. Next item of new business related to fiscal year 26 recoveries and rebates, and that was another budget amendment. This relates to recoveries primarily from the town's insurance carrier, the Virginia Risk Sharing Association, but also other parties such as Bedford County and citizens. When we submit insurance claims and we're reimbursed for things, we do typically accumulate some funding that we then try to put back into our operations. Previous uses for this money include repair of damage to a Ford truck used for the cemetery, a damaged police vehicle, batting cages at Liberty Lake Park, which were damaged in a windstorm, donation for street banners, and advertisements for public hearings. We had a list of things totaling $38,063 within the general fund, basically addressing some of the items I just mentioned. We also received $70,000 for the electric fund. That money would be used toward the purchase of new transformers. Altogether, Town Council was requested to approve a budget amendment of $108,063, creating line items both the revenue and expenditure sides. Motion to do so was made by Vice Mayor Updike, seconded by Councilman Todd Foreman, and unanimously approved by all who were present. Going back to Council's strategic objectives, this relates to their priority established to address infrastructure needs in the current and ongoing operation of the town. Next item of new business was another budget amendment to increase the amount of sponsorship for the Central Virginia Business Coalition. When the budget was approved almost a year ago for the current fiscal year, the town provided a contribution of $5,000 to the Central Virginia Business Coalition. This contribution and sponsorship relates to the fact that the Central Virginia Business Coalition are the ones who actually produce, manage, and carry out special events such as Centerfest, the Christmas parades, and certain other events such as the Battle of the Bands that have occurred in previous years. We had provided them with a contribution of $5,000. They had requested a slight increase of that of $2,500, and that required a budget amendment, which we requested council to make last night. Councilman Stacey Haley moved to approve that budget amendment of $2,500. It was seconded by Councilman Jay Ippolito, and it was unanimously approved by all members present. The last item of new business was yet again another budget amendment for an emergency chiller replacement. The existing HVAC chiller unit serving the main municipal building has suffered a catastrophic mechanical failure. Following a technical assessment by Public Works and our service provider Select Air, the unit has been deemed to be beyond economical repair due to its age and the extent of the damage. As this building houses essential government operations, public meeting spaces, administrative offices, and sensitive information technology infrastructure, a functional climate control system is critical for preservation of that equipment as well as records, and also for the health and safety of staff and citizens. The estimated cost for the replacement unit, including expedited shipping and professional installation, is $30,000. Finance Department has identified two sources of unbudgeted revenue to cover this expenditure without impacting the general fund's existing contingency reserves. The first is a surplus in the personal property tax fund. The second is proceeds from the sale of assets. We recently completed a transaction whereby the Chamber of Commerce obtained their property next door, and they gave us the final payment of $10,000 to complete that transaction. Again, this relates to council's priority to make sure that we have effective infrastructure to support our operations. So we made a point to mention that. Council was requested to provide the necessary budget amendment to both the revenue and the expenditure sides in the amount of $30,000. Motion was made by Councilman Dwight Evans to approve that, seconded by Councilman Stacey Haley. Councilman Todd Foreman raised the question of whether this will get us through the summer. I did provide a little bit more information about this as folks might also be aware. In addition to the HVAC system in general, we also have a problem with the electrical wiring of the building. We have engaged with Thompson and Litton to do the necessary design, creation of construction documents, and administration of construction activity to address those issues. Coincidentally, they met with staff on Monday of this week, the day before council, to talk about the process for that. In a best case scenario, they noted that they may be able to, that project, the construction activity could start as early as August. That depends on getting the bid documents and the drawings prepared, submitted, and gone through the procurement process ahead of that. So again, it's a best case scenario in which the remediation activity at Town Hall, waiting for the train to go by, Town Hall at 215 East Main Street will be undergoing significant renovations that will will result in us having to find alternate locations for all of our operations. Thompson Litton indicates that can happen as soon as August, and it could be completed as soon as May of next year. Realistically, we appreciate that input. We will plan for it. We've taken it into account. We don't really expect that to happen because probably due to my own superstition, optimism, and best case scenarios typically don't pan out. So it could be as soon as this August, but we don't really expect that to happen. Going back to this specific issue with our air conditioning, we had some failures of air conditioning this past summer, which made the building pretty uncomfortable and also had us very worried about the fact that our essential IT infrastructure was compromised. We intend to address this as part of the overall construction and renovation activity of the municipal building. However, even under a best case scenario, that's not even going to begin until August. So we have a temporary arrangement whereby we're going to put in a replacement chiller, and the cost of that is $30,000. And we're upfront about the fact that we're probably going to install something as soon as we can to get us through this year, possibly next year, depending on the scheduling, that we very likely will be removing as part of overall renovation activity. If that is what happens, we're going to try to get something that will meet the design of the overall renovations, but we don't know that that's going to be possible. And in fact, it's highly likely that it will not be. So essentially, we realize we are spending $30,000 to put in a piece of equipment that may be torn out within 1 year and most likely 2. At that point, we'll do our best to try to recover those costs by selling it as surplus, which is something we had talked about earlier in the meeting in another example. I did report that we had looked at renting an emergency chiller, and that was actually more expensive. The cost of doing that was about $90,000, and that relates to the fact that the thing would have to be brought in by a crane and installed, and then it would have to be taken out by a crane later. And the cost of that activity made rental to be a much more expensive option. With that, council then moved forward and took a vote, and the vote to appropriate the appropriate budget amendment was passed unanimously by all members of council. That concluded the business from last night. Roger, we do have another council meeting coming up on March 17th. Again, we meet on the first and third Tuesday of each month. We did change our meetings. We used to meet on the second and fourth Tuesday. And that was actually mentioned, I think, by Ms. DeLong in her comments. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to overlook that fact. That's a change we made last year. I will tell you, frankly, it still kind of trips up staff occasionally because after many years of doing things one way, it's hard to make a change. But just want to remind folks, we appreciate the input. We appreciate folks who come in person to the meetings. So those are at 7 o'clock p.m. on the first and third Tuesday of every month, except in the case of a rare exception where there is no new business or there's a holiday or council, by direction of the full council or the mayor, decides to cancel the meeting in the manner provided by town code and the town charter. Also appreciate your attention to this podcast. 2 trains in 1 podcast. A lot going on in and through Bedford these days. Sorry. Appreciate you joining me for this podcast and for all the ways you interact with us. We're happy to answer questions. Always happy to fix problems when we can. Answer questions, provide input, and receive your suggestions. Town Hall is open at 215 East Main Street on Monday through Friday from 8:30 a.m. to 5 o'clock p.m. Treasurer's office does close at 4:30 p.m. That's because, in addition to the fact that they take and receive payments, they're also conducting several other administrative activities, including reports, and that gives them a little bit of time to catch up on that without incurring overtime charges for the town. So the main number at Town Hall is 540-587-6001. If you call that number, either Deborah Anderson or Kathy Johnson typically will answer that, and if they can't help you, they will direct you to the appropriate assistance. Also encourage you to reach out to me directly. Email is a good option. My email address is bwarner@bedfordva.gov. Again, there's a lot of challenges we're facing. Some of those are good. Some of those not so good. We are seeing more and more new people come into Bedford every day. We're seeing new construction that we've never experienced before, and all that equates to changes in our community. So we're aware of that. Again, we're going through an update of our comprehensive plan currently and taking into account all these things that are going on. But Bedford, we see growth. We know there's still some areas that merit attention. We want to make sure we cover those things. But by and large, change is a constant thing for our community, and there are 8,000 people almost in town and probably 8,000 different opinions about that. We certainly value all of them. Just as we move forward, we do our best to maintain our own humanity and preserve that of those around us. That's always been a hallmark of this community. It makes it a wonderful place to live. And I'll close by saying that's why we use the phrase and frame the argument that Bedford is the world's best little town. And if it's not, that's always our goal. So until next time, I hope to join you on March 18th to recap the March 17th council meeting. I hope everyone enjoys warmer weather, has a chance to get outside, maybe air out their houses a little bit. And I wish good health, happiness, and well-being to everyone who's listening. And we will join you again in a couple of weeks.